This is discussed in chapter 19 of the conditions of contract, and it is also discussed in ICTAD conditions of contract. Unfortunately, I didn't prepare a slideshow. It is discussed in ICTAD conditions of contract, chapter 20, force majeure. Now, you have to know. I have noted that in the modern conditions of contract, which is issued by FIDIC 2017, which I don't think most of the people have still started using this one. Now, in 2017 edition, what they have done is instead of force majeure, they have termed this as a given a different term for this one. That is in chapter 18. They have said exceptional events instead of force majeure. They have titled this chapter as exceptional event. The idea behind this one is, I suppose, now force majeure is a civil law term. When I say civil law term, civil law countries, there is a concept called force majeure. It is applied in Europe, basically in European countries, not in England, not in Australia, not in United States, mostly European countries. Now, therefore, there might be a confusion because now in the conditions of contract, force majeure has been used as a contractual term, not as a civil law definition. It may be the reason that in the new edition of the conditions of contract, they have used what is called exceptional events. So firstly, I will discuss this clause in clause 19 of FIDIC conditions of contract 2019 version, because most of you must be having a copy of the FIDIC 2019 version, as well as ICTAD SBD 2007 version. Now, I have discussed this also to a certain extent in my previous lecture, but I will go through it carefully so that you will understand what it is. Now, there is a concept called frustration of contracts in the English law. Frustration of contracts means, supposing if you can't perform something, it is identified as frustration of contracts. This is the same concept as force majeure, and force majeure, as I said earlier, has been developed in civil law countries where civil law is being used, that is mostly in Europe. But English law, they don't recognize what is called force majeure, they recognize what is called frustration of contracts. The history behind frustration of contract is that normally in law, in contracts, what they believe that if you enter into a contract with another party, there is a compulsory requirement that you must abide by the contract. You have to honor the contract. So that was the concept which was existed in the British, in England and under the English law. So you can't do away, or you can't enforce, you can't avoid the contract merely because it is impossible. So the party who has suffered has to pay compensation in order for it to overcome the losses that they have incurred because the contract has not been performed. Now this was a very harsh rule, really, because sometimes it is not possible to perform the contract due to various reasons. So therefore, this harsh rule of performance of contract was discussed in English law, and I will give you the background of this one also, because you can't really study conditions of contract without knowing the background of law. Now, in a case, there is a famous case, because this will be recorded, so you can refer these cases later, which is called Taylor versus Caldwell. This is a very famous English law case which was decided long time back, I think 1863. So doctrine of frustration was first introduced in this case. Now what happened in this case was that a person hired a concert hall in order to perform some concert. So the organizer of this concert, he paid an advance payment for this hall, and he hired some musicians, etc., in order to have this function, where he has already started selling tickets as well. Now, before the function started, the entire hall was gutted by fire and the hall was destroyed. Therefore, it was impossible for the owner of the hall to give this hall in order to perform the contract. Therefore, he pleaded to the court saying that it should be treated as a frustration of contract because it is not possible for him to give the hall or repair the hall before commencement of the function because the entire hall was destroyed by fire. Now the court recognized this one. So therefore court said if there is a frustration in contract, you don't have to pay compensation for the other party. The losses lie where it has fallen. So basically both parties have to share the losses because of the frustration of contract. Now force majeure is a slightly different concept because force majeure is development of the European law or civil law countries, but there is some kind of sharing of losses between the parties. Now, in the conditions of contract, now the force majeure concept is introduced as a term of the contract. It is not the actual force majeure; it is a term of the contract. Now, if you go through clause 19.1 of the FIDIC and also similarly in the third conditions of contract, in order for force majeure to satisfy the requirements, it has to fulfill 4 requirements. It is given in 19.1 A, B, C, D, where all these 4 requirements have to be fulfilled in order for a contractor to say that there is a force majeure situation. All 4 conditions have to be satisfied. In order for completeness, I will read these clauses. It says which is beyond the party's control. So that some event must have to happen where all 4 conditions have to be satisfied under 19.1 of the FIDIC. So which is beyond the party's control, which such party could not reasonably have provided against before. That means actually basically they have not anticipated such an issue. And also, which having arisen, such party could not have reasonably have avoided. It's impossible to avoid such a situation, and which is not substantially attributed to the other parties. So all these 4 conditions which is stated in A, B, C, D has to be satisfied in order to have a force majeure. Now this force majeure which is defined in the conditions of contract is a contractual term. It's not a force majeure as applied in civil law countries. Now, if all these 4 conditions have been satisfied under A, B, C, and D, and also if one condition is listed thereafter is satisfied, the contract recognizes that there is a force majeure situation. Then Roman 1 says that there has to be a war, hostilities, etc. Roman 2 says there should be a rebellion, terrorist resolutions, insurrection, etc. So firstly, all 4 conditions have to be satisfied. Then either one of these conditions have to be satisfied. That is Roman 1, Roman 2, Roman 3, Roman 4, etc. Now Roman 5 says natural catastrophes such as earthquake, hurricane, typhoon, etc. Roman 4 says munition of war, explosives, etc. So it is not unreasonable. It is reasonable to assume that the COVID-19 issue falls into one of these conditions because it says force majeure may include. When you define the clause, it says force majeure may include, but is not limited to exceptional events or circumstances of the kind listed below. So when you have a clause like that, where it says force majeure may include but not limited to, then it covers more than what is given there. That is the whole idea. So therefore, force majeure or COVID-19 situation can be incorporated into force majeure because 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 was Roman 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 does not limit to 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, which is described there. So therefore, you can incorporate some other conditions which is included there. So therefore, I have in my book, I have introduced a chapter for force majeure. I will just read some of these things which I think will be useful for you in order to identify what the force majeure is. Now, during the COVID-19 situation, the contractors were affected because there's a stoppage of work. Now, therefore, I have identified this in page 892 of my book, which I will read. But if you want only this page, I wouldn't mind giving a photocopy of this page. But I will read it for your information. In the extra. Is COVID-19 compensation event for construction contracts. On the 11th of March 2020, World Health Organization declared COVID-19 as a global pandemic. The Sri Lankan government acted in accordance with this declaration and ordered a special holiday on the 16th March 2020. The state, under these difficult circumstances, then proceeded to impose a lockdown on all non-essential services, which included construction activities. So I am referring to the lockdown, which was had a little earlier, not the recent lockdown. On the 20th March, the government declared an island-wide curfew. This lockdown is same thing as curfew, but now they want to use different terms, which continued till 20th April. On the 20th April, curfew restrictions for districts other than Colombo, Gampaha, Kalutara Puttalam were lifted from 5 a.m. to 8 p.m. The curfew restrictions continued, which then meant that the construction industry has to cease work, and so the contractors in particular lost time and money. So therefore, there is definitely, you can't deny that there was no less loss for the contractors because they were forced to stop work. So therefore, I have categorized this loss into three paragraphs. There are losses into three. First paragraph, I say, work had to be stopped due to closure of construction sites for up to 57 days due to the lockdown. That period of time should not count against the contractors. Therefore, I am not referring to the lockdown which was made still active. I am referring to the lockdown which was taken place or which was forced upon the contractors and the entire country on the previous occasion. So there was a stoppage of work for 57 days. In order to reopen the site, certain sanitary restrictions and health guidelines were imposed by the government and other institutions to manage the spread of the pandemic in Sri Lanka. So therefore, there were certain health restrictions introduced. So lockdown is definitely loss for contractors. And also there were certain restrictions introduced by the government in order to avoid spreading of COVID-19. In order to comply with these rules and regulations, the contractors had to spend time and money preparing the site to commence work. This means greater expenditure and greater loss of time. So they were unable or they were not allowed to just open the site for construction activities. The government said you have to follow certain rules and regulations. Therefore, there is a restriction on the part of the contractors. Then once the guidelines had been followed and the site was reopened, it was difficult to recommence work in full efficiency. Most of the staff would travel from distant places and find temporary abode to reside in till the completion of their work. Most of them out of fear of being confined away from their residences due to an unpredictable imposition of the curfew, were reluctant to return. This means that the contractors had to recommence their work with a fewer staff members and so could work only about 35% of the efficiency. So therefore, definitely there were restrictions on the part of the contractors due to the three reasons which I have just said. Therefore, I believe it is fair and reasonable to compensate the contractors, but it does not mean they should be compensated lavishly in order to have huge profits also, because it is a loss for both parties. And also COVID-19 situation is a force majeure situation, which is also extension, which is also a part of the extension of frustration concept, because frustration is also similar. COVID-19 is a frustration situation. So losses that has been incurred to the contractors, I feel, has to be compensated, but not large profits as anticipated by the contractors. So is there anything which you want to discuss about COVID-19? That's what I want to say. But if you want, I can read some more, but is that enough for COVID-19? Can you please speak? Are you happy with the explanation which I have given for COVID-19, or you want anything else more than that?
Is it, what are the claims possible we can claim from the client as a contractor?
Claim from the client?
Yeah.
No, actually now, as I said, explained from the beginning, now under force majeure, clients cannot claim compensation from the contractor, because it is the loss, it is similar expansion of force majeure. The losses have to be paid to the contractor by the client and not by the client to the contractor.
Yeah, that is correct. I am referring the contractor claim from the client.
So I have discussed that now. There are under three headings. I read you paragraph 1, 2, and 3 under 3 headings. First thing is actually there was a stoppage of work, so therefore he is entitled for extension. And if he had to incur some expenditure, he is entitled for the expenditure and extension of time. And initially it was 57 days. Then when he wants to start construction, he was not allowed to just go into the construction site and start construction. He has to have certain things in place in order to avoid the spreading of COVID-19. There were certain restrictions imposed, this 1 meter distance or 2 meter distances. He has to maintain reasonable health conditions. He can't have so much of people in one place, and there were restrictions. And people have to wear masks, and those have to be provided. So that is an additional expense that has to be incurred by the contractor. So that is the other claim that he could make. The third claim is actually his construction efficiency has dropped down from 100% to a certain percent because he was not able to employ 100% workers. So therefore, I feel that it should fall under these 3 categories, but it does not mean he is entitled to make a huge profit out of it, because under frustration of contracts, the losses lie where they have fallen. So therefore, losses, certain profits, definitely the contractor has lost profit, but it does not mean that all these things have to be compensated.
Thank you, sir. What about this idling of assets like scaffolding and machineries which are idled in the sites till restart the works?
In fact, actually, if the contractor had to pay now sometimes they hire scaffolding, they hire shuttering, etc. So if they have hired certain things, they might have to pay compensation for the owner of the scaffolding, machinery, etc. So definitely that cost has to be paid by the contractor to the owner of the scaffolding hirer. So therefore, that loss has to be borne by the employer. But but it does not mean the contractor can make a profit out of his own equipment unless he can show a loss. He can so he should be able to show a loss to him due to the stoppage of work. Because frustration, you can't make a profit out of frustration. Now I will read that clause also because it will be beneficial to you. Now clause 19 on FIDIC is force majeure, but 19.7 is release of performance. That is the real frustration clause which has been incorporated into the FIDIC. 19.7. The ICTAD conditions of contractor, if you want the clause, I can refer it to you. It is 20.7 release of performance. So therefore, under frustration, nobody can claim damages. But in this situation, since it's not frustration, it's a force majeure situation, there are certain contract is entitled for certain damages as I have described previously. Can I go to the next question?
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Okay. Now then the next question is actually question number 2. I will read the question for your convenience. Type of interest payment, SPD1 and SPD3 do not mention about the type of interest, whereas SPD2 specifies that it should be compound interest. What does it mean? Now, normally in our courts, according to Sri Lankan court system, all this time actually we didn't have DAB, arbitration, etc. Whenever there is a dispute between the parties, what we did was we always referred to the civil courts, that is to the district courts and also commercial high court. Now, courts, when they pay compensation to parties, if there is a delay in paying compensation by the employer, they allow the contractor or the plaintiff in litigation to claim interest, but always they allowed simple interest, not the compound interest. So normally in our litigation process, the interest that you can claim is not compound interest, but simple interest. But when the conditions of contract FIDIC was introduced in 1919, what they say, I will read that clause actually with the payment delays. Clause 14.8 deals with payment, delay in payment. I will read only the first paragraph for your information. If the contractor does not receive payment in accordance with subclause 14.7, the contractor shall be entitled to receive financing charges compounded monthly on the amount unpaid during the period of delay. This period shall be deemed to commence on the date of payment specified in subclause 14.7. Payment irrespective in the case of subparagraph B, the date on which the interest payment certified, etc. So basically in the FIDIC conditions of contract, they say the payment, if there is a delay in making payments, interest has to be paid compounded monthly. So therefore, this is how this compound interest came to the scene in the ICTAD conditions of contract also. Therefore, in ICTAD SPD2, they have copied the FIDIC clause, equivalent clause, must be same clause 14.7, I think. 14.7, mostly I will not read that clause. Basically, it is copied from FIDIC. So they are talking about compound interest. But the source of SPD1 is not the ICTAD, not FIDIC. Source of SPD1 is NCE engineering contracts. So they have not specified anything in SPD1. SPD1, the relevant clause is clause 44, I think. Clause 43, the relevant clause in SPD1 is clause 43. it says the payment shall be adjusted for deductions for advance payment. I'm reading from SPD 1. The employer shall pay contractor the amount certified by the engineer within 14 days of the date of each certificate. If the employer makes a late payment, the contractor shall be payment interest on the late payment in the next payment. Interest shall be calculated from the date by which the payment should have been made up to the date when the late payment is made. So therefore, in SPD 1, they don't talk about compound interest because the source of ICTAR SPD 1 is different to the source of ICTAR SPD 2. SPD 2 has been copied from FIDIC and SPD 1 has been copied from NCE contracts. So normally, if it is not mentioned as compound interest, the interest that it will be getting by the contractor is a simple interest, because that is how our laws, our legal system is normally, it is geared to pay simple interest and not the compound interest. So question 2, is it all right? Is there anything you want to clarify? Can I proceed to question 3?
Yes, sir, you may.
Okay.
Okay. So question 3, variations. SPD 1 specifies as per clause 40.4, in certain instant variation shall be treated as a compensation event, whereas the other documents do not mention anything about it. Why is that? Now, that's a good question. Now, in SPD 1, variation is defined. It says in page, I'm reading from page 37. It says a variation is an instruction given by the engineer which arises the works which is instructed or approved as a variation under the subclause. And also it defines a compensation event also. Compensation events are those defined under clause 44. So we'll go to clause 44. Now, I would like to draw your attention to clause 44.2. Now, the ultimate result of compensation is same as what is given in the FIDIC and SPD 2, because it says if a compensation event would cause additional cost or would prevent the work being completed before the intended completion date, the contract price shall be increased and no intended completion date shall be extended. So although compensation event is not specifically defined in SPD 2, but the SPD 2 is also telling the same thing. There is no difference between SPD 1 and SPD 2 as far as compensation that has to be paid to the contractor. Because if a variation issue is issued under SPD 2, you might have to pay cost of the variation to the contractor. And also you might have to pay extension, you might have to grant extension of time to the contractor. So therefore, although it is not defined as a compensation event in SPD 2, whatever the contractor's status with respect to SPD 2 and SPD 1 is same. So therefore, you don't have to define that as a compensation event, but ultimately the contractor is entitled for extension of time if it is really required, and is entitled to extra cost. So therefore, you don't have to specifically say contractor has to be compensated, because in FIDIC conditions of contract and SPD 2, under variation clause, it is given as a variation to the contract where the contractor can claim compensation. Now under 13 point clause 13 discusses about variations. It says that variation, the contract, I will read the important part of variation in order for you to understand what it is. 13.1 discusses about a variation. And also it says that each variation may include Roman A, changes to the quantities and items of work included in the contract. However, such changes do not necessarily constitute a variation. And also, supposing if there is a variation to the contract, the contractor is entitled for extension of time and also additional cost really if it is required. So therefore, although it is not described as a compensation event, all variations have to be valued before issuing a variation, and the contractor has to be compensated for variation. Are you all right with question number 3? Now there is a question raised by Mr. One second, there are a few questions. I will just go through this one. COVID-19 issue falling down under employer's risk as 17.3. Yes, it is an employer's risk. This has been raised by Mr. Khatir from Khatir to everyone. COVID-19 is an employer's risk. It's not the contractor's risk because it's a force majeure. Is there any possibilities to claim rather than EOT for the contractor? Is there any possibilities to claim rather than EOT for the contractor? I can't understand the second question. Rather than EOT, he can claim compensation also, that I have explained to you. Third question is from IESL DC. You can register through this link as registration, sorry.
For registration, sir.
What about the delay in awarding the contract due to lockdown? Even bid opening took place before March 2020. Basically, contracts, no price escalation and foreign funded one. Then how can the contractor bear the price escalation? Now, price escalation, I can remember there was another question raised by another person. Now, I want to draw your attention to I think some of the people, those who are using government contracts, must be using this procurement manual, which has been published in 2006. Are you familiar with procurement manual? It's a government publication. Now, according to the procurement manual, I don't know how many people are implementing these aspects in the stated in the procurement manual. It is given in the procurement manual, if the duration of the contract is more than 3 months, that there should be a price escalation clause. So therefore, I will exactly read I can't remember Is there any people, those who are working for the government sector, are you following this procurement manual?
Yeah, sir, we are normally following that.
Sorry, I can't hear you.
Yeah, we are normally following that one. Sir.
Now, is there, I can remember there was a clause like that. I can't, it will take a little bit of time for me to go through this one. Is there, I can remember there was a clause here, price adjustment. I will read from, I'm reading from page 36, procurement guidelines, not the manual, 5.4.2. In any contract for works exceeding a period of 3 months, the price variation formulae for the SLR component shall be included in the bidding document, and the contract agreement price variation formulae developed by ICTAD shall be used. Now, I don't know, that is what the procurement guidelines says. So therefore, for government contracts, if the duration of the contract is more than 3 months, you have to use the price escalation, but I'm not sure whether it's a offense or not, but that is the term which is specified in the procurement guidelines. Now, it also says under 5.4.3 for foreign funded projects, if it is a requirement of foreign funding agency that price adjustments shall be made for foreign currency component, such recommended formula may be used for foreign currency component. However, in such cases, ICTAD formula shall be used for SLR component. Now, this 5.4.3, I don't agree with 5.4.3 because normally if you use ICTAD formula, our escalation cost, if you use the indices given in the ICTAD, our price indices go up fairly sharply. But in other countries, the escalation is not so much. So if you use this for foreign currency, it's going to cause a serious loss for the government. So therefore, you might have to decide on this matter. I can't give a ruling because I am just a private consultant. If we get extension for road project due to rain, what we need to give for client? That is the question raised by from Isuru Batuvita. Now, normally, normal weather conditions, you can't get a time extension. Normal weather, normal rains, you have to allow for. When we are pricing for a project, you have to get the weather pattern of that specific area, and you have to evaluate how much are you going to take extra time due to poor weather conditions. So therefore, I don't think you can ask for extension of time due to normal rain. But if there is an adverse weather conditions, if the rain is very heavy, like the rain that we encountered very recently, about say 200 millimeter rain, etc., which is a very heavy rain, then you can ask for extension of time. But basically, you have to produce proper information in order for you to claim extension of time. Weather records have to be certified by the meteorological department. It has to be submitted properly, and you must give sufficient time. You must give notice within a reasonable time, etc. Normally, when there is an adverse weather claim, that is not a mistake, or that is, you can't claim cost generally. If you are making a claim for weather, you can't claim for cost as a contractor. As this third wave of outbreak is not mentioned as an event to termination construction work, is there any possibility that contractor can claim extension of time from the employer for this travel restrictions period? If so, how long can contract can be claimed, EOT? And also, what are the documents that should be submitted to the client EOT approval? So normally, I think even this stoppage of work, current stoppage of work also, the contractors should be entitled to claim extension of time, because contractors are unable to work in the full capacity. So therefore, they are entitled for extension of time. Then there is a file somebody has sent. I don't know how to download it.
That is the question, sir.
That's the question now.
All the
Do I have to
questions.
download that one or?
No need, sir. No need. That's for participants. To refer the
No, sir, that is for the participations to issue the certificate.
Right, sorry. Dear sir, the first question is, if the contractor suffered due to incompetency of the engineer, example, reviewing of design and approval, how can get claim for this? The second question is, design will contract, what extent they can follow contractor's own design, because if the engineer purposely delay for grant approval and reviewing the design. I think if I understand the question properly, if there is a delay in issuing drawings, definitely there is a claim for the contractor for extension of time and cost. Only thing is, you can't just make a claim at the end of the project saying that there is a delay in drawings. When, for example, if you are doing a, let's say, 3-4 story building as a contractor, normally in the civil construction, you can't get all the drawings at the same time. You may get the foundation drawings initially. So you, as a contractor, you must have a construction program. And you must send the program to the employer or to the engineer and say, this is my program. I want 3rd floor drawings by this date. I want 4th floor drawings by this date, because although I may be at the foundation level, I have to prepare my bar schedules, I have to order my steel, etc. So therefore, proper programming is essential in order for you to claim extension of time for delays on the part of the employer. So that programs have to be updated. Normally monthly it has to be updated. So therefore, there should be evidence in order to substantiate your claim. Supposing At the end of the project, if you are going to claim a lot of time extension and cost due to the delays on the part of the engineer, which is very usual, it's not unusual, but you must substantiate your claim with evidence. So therefore, you can't just make a claim and compute some equation and make a claim. Can I proceed with the other questions, or is there anything that somebody wants to specific questions? Is there any possibility that the contractor can claim extension of time from the employer for this travel restrictions period, because they have to add some permanent workers according to the grade? Please give brief explanation. I think that I explained sufficiently about the COVID situation. Definitely there is a claim for the contractor. So there are a lot of restrictions. People are working under a lot of restrictions. But only thing is you might have to maintain proper records. Otherwise you can't make a claim. Can I go to question number 4, please? Question number 4, arbitration. Even though CEDA has no mandate to deal with arbitration, the procedure specified in selecting an arbitrator after an adjudication SBD 4 is different from specified in SPD. What is the reason behind? Now, to answer this question, actually, what I can say is there is no reason for these things, because SPD 1 has been prepared by a separate group of people. SPD 2 has been prepared by a separate group of people. So there is no uniformity in the documents submitted by CEDA, because different expertise have been involved in preparing documentation. So there is a contrast difference between the arbitration clause in one document and the other document. But if you are a contractor or an employer, if you want to go to arbitration or adjudication, you have to exactly follow the clauses which is given in the conditions of contract. So it might differ from one document to another document. So therefore, although as correctly raised by this question number 4, CEDA has no mandate to carry out arbitration. They have given a procedure in order for you to facilitate your resolving construction disputes. Because now it has generally, there is a belief that adjudication process is faster. You have to have an adjudication process because during construction, you want to resolve your disputes while you are proceeding with construction. Now, my experience with adjudication is it is a good process if you perform the adjudication in a proper manner. Because in a construction project, you can't afford to go for litigation or arbitration while the project is in progress, because it might involve stopping the project altogether. So therefore, adjudication process is a very effective and efficient way of resolving construction disputes while the project is in progress. Arbitration in other countries is an efficient process. But unfortunately, in Sri Lanka, arbitration is not so efficient. Arbitration takes time. But arbitration has been introduced to the ICTAD conditions of contract because it has been introduced to the FIDIC conditions of contract. And also most of the international contractors, they insist that there should be an adjudication and arbitration clause because they want to resolve their disputes in an expeditious manner. Can you imagine a foreign contractor who comes to Sri Lanka to carry out a construction project has been spending years and years in litigation in a court of law? They don't like that. They want adjudication to be performed as fast as possible. So therefore, I hope the question number 4 I have answered, because FIDIC conditions of contract arbitration clause is very clear, because there is a sequence of events in FIDIC conditions of contract in order to resolve your disputes. But in the ICTAD conditions of contract or CEDA, they have not followed the sequence. They have copied from FIDIC and they have prepared a procedure there. But having an arbitration process is useful. Because otherwise, what will happen is you have to go to courts in order to resolve your construction disputes.
Hello, sir.
Yes,
There is a question. Shall I ask?
yes.
I asked two questions, sir. One related to that incompetency of the engineer. Second one
Yes.
is related to design bill contractor. As a design bill contractor, we are the responsible for the design. So in that case, sometimes we are submitting some design for the review, but the engineers purposely or kind of mistakes or kind of things they are finding out in our design and always making delay for approval. So in that case, as a confidently as a designer, we can go with our own design if without any approval or a kind of official.
That's a good. That's a okay. What's your name, gentlemen?
SM Rafiz
That's a
from
very-
Handy. Rafiz.
That's a very good question, actually. It's because if it is a design and build project, design responsibility is vested with the contractor. Although you are supposed to get approval from the engineer, you are responsible for the design. Now I can't quote the project actually because normally arbitration and adjudication are private dispute resolution process, so we are not supposed to quote the name of the project. But in one of the highway projects, I can remember I was a DAB member, and the contractor has done a design for bridges. And in one of these bridge structures, there is a very, what you call a capping beam cantilevering for both sides. And this has been designed by the contractor. Now in these capping beams, actually the contractor has put a lot of cantilever steel. And the employer or the engineer who is looking after the interest of the employer, he said that this is a measure and pay contract. Therefore, the contractor has put additional steel because he wants to make money out of it. And therefore, he curtailed the steel. But normally, as engineers, we know when you have a cantilever, the cantilever moment does not drop down immediately. You have some same shape like the cantilever is developing. It has to diminish also over a distance. So as a result of curtailing the steel, the contractor has used the engineer's design and there were cracks in the capping beams. And this was referred to the DAB for a decision. Now, I was one of the members of the DAB. Since the contractor is responsible for the design, we gave a decision in favor of the employer. Because contractor, if he is confident that his design is correct, he must proceed with his design, and also he can make a claim from the DAB or arbitration later. But if the contractor's design is changed by the employer, it does not mean the employer or the engineer has taken the responsibility. Still, the design responsibility is vested with the contract. So if he is not confident with the design review made by the engineer, he shall not adjust the design. He shall proceed with the design, correct design that he believes is correct, and then make a claim at a subsequent stage. And also, if there is a delay on the part of the engineer in reviewing designs, the engineer the contractor must always maintain times. He can maintain times and say, I have given the design on 1st of December and I received the check design on 31st of December. So therefore, there is a delay of 2 weeks or 3 weeks. And therefore, I am entitled for extension of time. Although you may not get this extension of time from the engineer, if you go to a DAB, if you're not satisfied with the decision of the engineer, you might have to go to DAB or arbitration. So therefore, you will be able to make a claim if you put a positive claim with your data. Now, it's very important for me to emphasize that when you are submitting your information or when you are submitting a claim as a contractor, you must support your claim with information, with whatever records that you have maintained. You can't just make a claim saying that at the end of the contract, there was a delay in drawings, which I have emphasized earlier also. Are you all right with that answer?
So if the design phase is almost completed under the construction stage, what is the procedure, sir? If the design, we have do the revision or kind of design after the design phase stage. So if it is it applicable to make a
So if you have finished if you have finished the design initially, and if the design in the design review stage where you have already started construction, there is a delay. Same thing, you have to maintain records and say design reviews took so much of time, and therefore you are entitled for whatever time. And also in contracts, actually, normally if it is a design and build contract, there should be you have to agree with a time frame, because you have to allow the engineer to check the designs also. Engineer can't just check designs overnight. Engineer also takes
Okay, thank you,
some
sir.
time to check the design. So you must have an arrangement with the engineer in order to review the design. You must give a reasonable time. But if the time is exceeding, you have to support your claim with information saying that the time has been exceeded by the employer or the engineer.
Thank you, sir.
Then the next question is notice for termination, question number 5. SPD 1 does not mention about giving notice termination, whereas SPD 2, all of the SPDs mention about notice of termination. Now, basically, can I read the SPD 1? Now, SPD 1 also actually there is a time given, although not exact time is given in SPD 1. I'm reading from 59.5 of the SPD 1. It says if the contract is terminated, the contractor shall stop work immediately, make the site safe and secure. That is very important. Contractor can't just leave the site even under SPD 5. And leave the site as soon as reasonably possible. So it does not mean that he has to vacate the site on the next day. But most important thing is he must make the site secure, because you shall not allow others to enter the site, because supposing if somebody else enter the site and if he's injured due to whatever reason, still the contractor might be responsible, because he can't just leave open the site and leave the site. So even in SPD 1, it says you have to leave within a reasonable time. It does not mean immediately. So therefore, there is a time notice for termination. Even in SPD 1, there is a time which is specified. But in SPD 2, I think there is a specific time of 2 weeks, if I can remember. So although in SPD 1 time is not specified, the contractor can take a reasonable time before leaving the site. Can I go to the next question? Question number 6 is, from your talk, it appears that both FIDIC and SPD are applicable in Sri Lanka. If so, can we select few favorable clauses from FIDIC to replace relevant ones in the STB and use them in a contract? Now, according to the CEDA, I have gone to CEDA for several seminars and discussions, etc. Now, they say that it is compulsory to use CEDA conditions of contract in Sri Lanka. In the revision also, they want to make that is compulsory. But I have told CEDA on several occasions, you can't make a conditions of contract compulsory, because it is a freedom of the parties. Now, I have explained in my previous lecture also, If the parties agree to the terms of the contract, that is called freedom of contract in Sri Lankan law. So therefore, you can't restrict somebody and say you better use FIDIC or SEDA. FIDIC or SEDA. It depends on the wish of the employer. Now, as the question says, you can use SPD contract, but you can modify the SPD by using a few FIDIC clauses. There is no restriction of that one. But if you are preparing a government documents, you might have to confine to SBD, but there is something called particular conditions of contract data in the SPD. Now that has to be filled by the employer. So therefore, you have the option of changing contracts, but not completely changing. You can change according to the SEDA also, but you can't completely change and do a fresh document. So your basic document is a standard conditions of contract, but you may add few clauses, you may vary few clauses depending on your requirement. But the main document has to be a standard document. Is it necessary to sign a MOU before granting an extension of contract without inserting any new conditions that you deviate from the existing ones in the contract? Question number 7, I am answering question number 7. Now suppose it says that, now supposing if the employer wants to impose additional conditions before granting extension of time, there might be a problem at a later stage where the contractor might claim cost of overheads, profits, etc. So therefore, if the employer thinks that his conditions that he is imposing are conditional, that is, he is giving extension of time on certain conditions, saying that your overheads will be paid only 50% or you will not be entitled for profit, etc. I think as suggested by this question, it is better to sign a fresh MOU. MOU means another contract revising your previous contract. So therefore, I would say that the proposal made in question 7 is good. It is better to sign a MOU before you entering into a new revised contract if you want to change the terms of the contract. I am not clear about this question raised by Mr. Kamal Deshapriya, I think. Mr. Kamal Deshapriya, can you raise that question? Can you read it again?
Yes, sir. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, sir. If contract, we conducted a project according to the FIDIC Silver Book, and contractor delayed in defect rectification and extended defect rectification period for 2 times. Now we decided to do the critical rectification works by ourselves, and I want to get some clarification about how to pay the third-party contractors for the rectification and how to deduct from the main contractors, EPC's retention money. So do we need to?
Okay. Now, basically, if you want your defects to be done by the third contractor, first thing is actually you have to give opportunity to the contractor in order for him to carry out the defects. So therefore, defects liability period is generated now. There is a very important thing which I want to mention. There is something called patent defects and latent defects. Patent defects are defects which are visible at the time of handing over the project to the employer. That is visible defects, but are the visible. So basically, patent defects have to be done by the contractor before handing over the project to the employer during the defects liability period. Latent defects are called hidden defects which cannot be identified at the time of handing over, and therefore latent defects can be raised during the defects liability period or defects notification period. Now, if you want defects to be done by a third-party contractor or by the employer, you have to give sufficient notice to the contractor to carry out the defects. You can't just employ a third-party contractor. Now, in your case, Mr. Kamal, you have informed the contractor on several occasions to carry out the defects, and the contractor has failed to carry out the defects. So therefore, you have a right to give it to a third party. Now, when you are giving to a third party, you have to be very careful. You must get a quotation from the third party, or maybe two parties, not from a selected person. You might have to get a price from two people at least, and you have to decide on the minimum price, and you must inform the contractor saying that this is the cost which we are going to incur because we have to employ a third party in order to rectify the defects, and therefore we are going to recover this cost from you because we have failed to carry out the defects. So if you do that, you are generally covered because you have already taken action because the contractor has failed to carry out the defects. You have taken independent quotations. You are not giving to your favorite man. And also you have informed the original contractor, initial contractor, that you are going to recover this cost from him. So therefore you have to follow a procedure in order for you to carry out the defects. Are you all right?
Yeah, thank you, sir. Understood.
There's a question from Mr. Kirupa about fear. This is coronavirus. It's not in the FIDIC. Actually, I have edited the book. I read from my book. The author is myself. That's available in the ISL for sale. So I have written about say 3 or 4 pages on FIDIC. On COVID. That is not in the FIDIC. Next question, we asked to submit an updated work program during the lockdown period. Unfortunately, the contractor replied that he was unable to submit an update work program during the lockdown period. So can we consider this period for EOT? I'm not very clear on this one. If the contractor was unable to carry out work, I'm not sure about the question. But if the contractor was unable to carry out work during the lockdown period, you might have to give extension of time, reasonable extension of time. You have to give that time. Generally, actually, now there is another question which is very difficult to answer also. Due to the sudden increase of US dollar rate against Sri Lankan rupee, there is a huge difference in price of importing E&M items, example, generator or lifts, but we can't accommodate them to price escalation. ICTAD bulletin index not considering the importing items and dollar prices. Variations, what shall we do? This question has been raised by Satya. I can't read the name, Satyanandan, I think. I think supposing if your claim does not fall within the price escalation clause, you might have to think of claiming that increase in price from another clause, which I can't offhand tell you. So I think your claim is a genuine claim because your prices have been increased due to the increase in dollar with respect to the Sri Lankan currency. So you have a genuine claim. So you might have to fish for another clause in the conditions of contract because your claim is a genuine claim. So I can't often say give a clause, but I should be able to study this one. As you mentioned that the contractor can claim the cost incurred for the additional cost due to COVID-19, health guidelines for that can the contractor add overhead and profit for that cost claim. Now the profit is a bit tricky thing actually this, because under the frustration of contraction, basically frustration does not allow you to claim a profit. It says the losses will lie where it has fallen. So you should be able to claim cost of overheads due to COVID-19, but I might have to see whether you can claim the profit, because under frustration, you can't claim a profit from this one, because as I said in that case, initially I discussed about a court case which was decided in 1893, I think. Due to frustration, you can't claim profit. If a contract is terminated by the employer as per the engineer's determination, is there any limited duration in order to proceed with the arbitration by the contractor? I think there is a case with respect to this claim. Arbitration can be called even after 6-7 years, you can call for arbitration. There is no restriction on the claim, but you can't claim after 20 years. But even after 70 years, there is an instance where they have claimed after 7 years. Conditions of contract stipulates that the cost of adjudicator is shared equally by both parties. I'm reading question number 8. Is it correct to extend this clause to cover the cost of adjudication? I have cut that and put arbitration. I think the question is wrong, so I have corrected it. Now, in the conditions of contract, where in FIDIC, ICTAD, etc., it always states that the cost of adjudication has to be borne equally by both parties, 50% by the contractor and 50% by the employer. Now, in arbitration, actually, the arbitration acts governs the arbitration between the parties. So the arbitrator has the liberty of awarding the cost of arbitration, arbitrator according to the Arbitration Act. Now, the conditions of contract is an agreement agreed between the parties, between the employer and the contractor. So therefore, adjudication, there is no legal provision of adjudication. Since there is no legal law governing adjudication, parties could agree on adjudication regarding the fees, saying that the fees have to be shared by both parties. But in in arbitration, you can't do that, because the arbitration cost is governed by the Arbitration Act, which is an act passed by the Parliament. So therefore, arbitration, the cost, supposing if the arbitrator, if the winning party has incurred a cost, arbitrator has the liberty of awarding cost to the winning party. Question number 9. Same to the SPD, ITB clause 35.2 is not be mentioned in SPD 1 or 3. As per SPD 1, if the contractor will not sign the contract and or will not submit the performance bond within the specified time, will it be treated as termination, since the legal contract is started from LOA? Now, question number 9, what she is asking is whether Now, it is a requirement according to FIDIC and ICTAD, both conditions of contract. Once the contract is awarded to the contractor, he must provide the performance bond. That is the first requirement that has to be fulfilled by the contractor, because he shall not walk into the construction site without submitting a performance bond. I think that as stated in the question, it is very correctly stated that the contract is formed once the letter of acceptance is signed by the employer and sent to the contractor. So there is a binding contract between the parties. Once the contract is formed, performance bond has to be submitted by the contractor to the employer, and he shall not commence any work and is not entitled to claim any advance payment without submitting the performance bond. So therefore, if the contractor fails to submit the performance bond within a specified time in the contract, definitely contract could be terminated by the employer because he has failed to fulfill the terms of the contract. And also, he can forfeit the bid bond. There is no restriction on that one. So question number 9 gives the answer also. The answer given in question number 9 is correct. As an employer, question number 10. As an employer, we shall withhold the amount of rectification or replacement or value of the work he fails to do until the rectification or replacement or do the work as per the SPD to COC 14.5. It is stated as withheld. Shall we deduct the amount of loss permanently? The loss caused due to the rectification of failing to perform the work, and also in what scenario we can deal the issue. I'm not sure about the question 14, referring to 14.58. (14.5a) says, if anything supplied or work done by the contractor is not in accordance with the contract, the cost of rectification or replacement may be withheld until rectification or replacement has been complied and or the contractor was or is failing to perform any work or obligation in accordance with the contract and had been so notified by the engineer, the value of work or obligation may be withheld until the work or obligation has been performed. I think the question raised by this question number 10 is whether he could recover the money. Definitely you can recover the money. I think I explained this one to an earlier question raised by another person. Definitely you can recover the money, although you can temporarily withhold the money until you carry out the rectification work. And also once the rectification work is done, you have to, if you can substantiate your cost, you can definitely recover the cost of rectification. No, it's not only withholding. Now there is a similar clause in ICTA FIDIC conditions of contract. I will read that also for completeness. When the taking over certificate has been issued for works, the first half of the retention money shall be certified by the engineer for payment to the contractor. If a taking over certificate is issued for section or part of the works, a proportion of the retention money shall be certified and paid. This portion shall be 2/5 of the proportion calculated by dividing the etc. No, that is not relevant. So definitely you can recover the cost. There is no two words, you can recover the cost. Question number 11 is a fairly long question. I will, in any case, I will read that question. Shall the contractor be entitled to EOT for the only reason for payment delays of interim claims? Now, only thing is contractor, if for delay in interim payments is discussed in FIDIC conditions of contract 14.8. There is no provision in the FIDIC conditions of contract for the contractor to claim extension of time according to the contract that the parties have agreed. So therefore, if there is no term for extension of time, the contractor cannot claim extension of time for delay in making payments. Now here it says, if the contractor does not receive payments in accordance with subclause 14.7, the contractor shall be entitled to receive financing charges compounded monthly, which I read earlier, on the amount unpaid during the period of delay. The period shall be deemed to commence on the date of etc. Unless otherwise stated in the particular conditions, these financing charges. The contractor shall be entitled to this payment without formal notice. So therefore, there is no entitlement for extension of time if there is a delay in making interim payments. So that is the answer for that question raised by Mr. Kirubagan. I'm going to question number 11. We feel in SPD2 COC clause 13.4b2, contract data clause number 13.4b is stating something different meaning. Is that the same or different? COC 13.4b2 is referring to SBD2 like a percentage of attendance fees, but contract data 13.4b percentage for adjustment of provisional sums. So shall I answer that? (13.4b). I'm reading from 13.4b. Are you referring to 13.4b2? 13.4b2. 13.4b2 reads as this. I will read it. The sum for overhead charges and profit calculated as a percentage of these actual amounts by applying the relevant percentage rate, if any, stated in the appropriate schedule. If there is no such rate, the percentage rate stated in the contract data shall be applied. Now, this is pricing. This is regarding pricing of provisional sum items. Now, you know what is provisional sum? Now, in the conditions of contract, when you enter into a contract with another party, there may be certain items actually which has not been properly identified by the employer at the time of entering into the contract. Now, let's say the employer wants to have a generator, or employer wants to have air conditioning, but he has not decided whether to have a central air conditioning or window type air conditioning. So therefore, he puts a sum there. You say, I'm allowing so much as a provisional sum for air conditioning. Now, when the contract is proceeding, the employer has already finalized whether he's going to have what type of air conditioning system. Now, in such a situation, what he has to do is actually the employer or the engineer will ask the contractor to submit a quotation for this amount for the provisional sum. So once the contractor submits a quotation, he has to submit a reasonable quotation and he must justify the quotation. So as a contractor, you might have to take quotations from 3 people and submit to say that he has taken the price of air conditioning from so and so because he's the lowest and the best. And this is my cost, this is my overhead cost, and this is my profit. So therefore, if you can't put an arbitrary cost and profit saying that this is my cost and this is my profit to the price quoted by another subcontractor who is going to supply the air conditioning units. Now, what it says is actually a sum of overhead charges and profit calculated as a percentage of these actual amounts by applying the relevant percentage, if any. That means actually when you are submitting a tender, sometimes intelligent employer, they will ask the cost of overheads and profit of the contractor. Because in future, supposing if you want to identify some work, you can substitute these values into the cost of profit and overheads of the contractor's price, because some works are not identified at the time of tendering. In such a situation, there is a schedule which is given with the bill of quantities, and in the schedule, the prices are given there, cost of overheads and profits of the contractor. So if it is given there in the schedule, there is no issue, because if the contractor has said the subcontractor wanted 10 million and my overhead is 10% and my profit is 5%, what he has to do is he has to add 10% and 5% and increase the price and submit to the employer. So employer has no issue with respect to this one because he has already quoted this one in a schedule. But if he has not quoted this one in a schedule, then the contract data, there is a figure. In contract data, shall we go to 13.42 contract data. 13.4 contract data. Percentage of adjustment of provisional sum. So this is the same percentage that they are talking about. Supposing if the contract has failed to submit this cost of overheads and profit in a schedule in the bill of quantities or in a schedule, he must insert that percentage in the contract data so that that percentage will be used in order to evaluate the contractor's cost of overheads and profit on top of the subcontractor's price. Are you all right with that? Now, there is another question part of it. Before reading that one, are you happy with that answer? Can I read the balance portion of this question number 11? Can we go around 50% of the contract sum as price sum? Example, if we need to include lift as a stage 2 works, up to which percentage we can adapt the provisional sum? If it is nearly 50% of the contract sum, then do we need to go to normal VOQ item and give specifications for the lift and allow the bidder to quote as a suit the specification, or even though its higher percentage can be adapted provisional sum? Now, the whole idea of having a provisional sum is actually, as I explained earlier, the items which has not been identified at the time of tendering, you have to put these items as provisional sums, because otherwise what will happen is for the employer, it will be a surprise to the employer because he doesn't know what is going to be his final cost of the contract. So the consultant, what he does is actually, in order to avoid the surprise to the employer, he prepared the bill of quantities on the identified works, and on unidentified works, he leaves some allowance as a provisional sum so that the employer is aware that he has to spend so much of money in future to install the air conditioning or to install a generator, etc. So if the provisional sum item is going to be reduced, there is no issue at all, because employer, it is a relief to the employer. Employer was anticipating that he might have to spend 10 million for the AC, but it has come down to 5 million. So therefore, it's not a surprise to the employer. But supposing instead of 10 million, if he has to spend 15 million or 20 million, the employer must find a way of finding that additional sum of money. So therefore, it is going to be a problem for the employer. So it is not a problem for the contractor. So therefore, this question is asking me whether it could be increased from the amount which is stated for the provisional sum. It could increase. But only thing is the employer, there should be a way of employer finding finances in order to install the air conditioning system. So therefore, you can increase the provisional sum amounts in the contract. You can decrease the provisional sums in the amount in the contract. Only problem is if the provisional sum is increased by a large percentage, there might be no provision in the contract for the employer to supply that amount of money, because he may have financed the project thinking that it's going to end up at 100 million. Now, if it is going to cost 150 million, he has to find money in order for him to finish the project. So that is the only question. Otherwise, you can increase the amount. There is no issue. Are you clear in 11? Question number 11, it's a fairly long question, but I try to explain as much as possible. After termination of contract, contractor has been allowed to continue the work and asked to complete the work within 2 months. But this decision was taken by some high-ranking people. So if this period may be treated as an EOT, when he succeeds, fails at the end of the period. I think once you terminate the contract, you can't, it's a very tricky question. I think I don't want to, I can give an answer, but I think you might be having a dispute on this matter. So I will just give a general answer because I don't know the exact facts of this case. Once you terminate the contract actually, I don't think you can employ the same contractor in order to do additional work because that contract is terminated. If it is a private contract, of course, you can have an arrangement with the contractor because you are spending your own money or your organization money. And if it's a private contract, you can sign a separate MOU and enter into a contract with the contractor. But if it is a government contract, actually, you really speaking, you can't do that because you have to retender it to carry out the balance work. You can't just give it to a contractor and sign the MOU. That's a completely wrong procedure. So I don't want to give a lot of advice on this matter because you might be facing some inquiry or whatever it is, I'm not sure. Unless there is a specific thing you can ask privately, I don't want to speculate on this one, but generally once you terminate the contract, that is the end of it. Question number 12. Procedures to be adapted in selecting arbitrator to proceed after adjudication stated in SPD 123 are different. So I have answered that question. I think there is a reason. There is no reason for that one. Only thing is there should be a proper procedure in arbitration. Now I will show you the SBD 2 where there is the clause is completely wrong, but don't mess up the arbitration because of me. Now, generally, it's a very important question because of some of these contracts end up in disputes. Now, arbitration is discussed in FIDIC conditions in clause 20.1. I will not discuss the complete arbitration process. The dispute resolution is discussed in clause 20.1 in the conditions of contract. Now, in FIDIC conditions of contract, the procedure you can see is very clear. Now, clause 20.2 deals with appointment of the adjudication. So definitely before arbitration, you must have adjudication. This is discussed in clause 20.2, which I will not read the clause entirely. Appointment of the dispute adjudication board, appointment of the adjudicator is discussed in clause 20.2. Now, clause 20.3 says failure to agree on the adjudication board. So this is discussing about adjudication. Clause 20.4, obtaining dispute board decisions. So first you say in 20.2, appointment. So if you fail to appoint the DAB, how you should appoint the DAB? Then the adjudication process is defined in 20.4. Then the decision of the adjudicator also discussed in clause 20.4. So once the adjudicator gives the decision according to 20.4, it says there can be amicable settlement between the parties. You can see there is a, if you draw a flow chart of this matter, there is a clean flow. First you appoint the DAB, then you if you fail to appoint the DAB, how you are going to appoint the DAB? After appoint the DAB, how the DAB is going to give the decision. Then how you are going to settle this matter if you are with the amicable settlement. So all these, there is a continuity, there is a flow in the process. Then there is arbitration. I will read only the first paragraph in arbitration. It says, unless settled amicably by any dispute in respect of which the DAB decision has been not become final and binding, shall be finally settled by arbitration unless otherwise agreed by both parties. So therefore it says, unless you are unable to settle this dispute by adjudication and also thereafter by amicable settlement, then you better go for arbitration. So that is a procedure which is discussed in the FIDIC conditions of contract. Now, by copying this clause to the ICTAD conditions of contract, they have missed up this clause. Now here the arbitration is discussed in clause 19.5. Now there is no flow to adjudication. It says, any dispute of whatever nature arising from out of in connection with this agreement on the interpretation shall be settled by arbitration. So this arbitration is not an independent process from the adjudication. Arbitration shall be made only if there is a failure in adjudication. So that is why in the FIDIC conditions of contract, they have given a nice flow. You go to arbitration. If you fail arbitration, you have amicable settlement. Then you go to arbitration. So therefore, in ICTAD, the flow has been disturbed by introducing a new arbitration clause. Therefore, the question here is actually procedure to be adopted selecting an arbitrator to proceed adjudication stated in are different. Now, whatever it is, they have copied from various sources and input this one. So you don't have to worry about the differences. Supposing if you have signed SPD1, you follow SPD1 strictly. If you have followed SPD2, follow SPD2 strictly. And if you have followed SPD3, follow SPD3 strictly. But my advice is actually the selection of the arbitrator has to be very simple. Otherwise, you spend so much of years in selecting arbitrator in a court of law. Now, my experience actually, I have appeared for a case as a lawyer in selecting an arbitrator where I spent 3 years in the Commercial High Court in Colombo in order to select an arbitrator. It has taken so much of time and money. So therefore, you have to have a very simple procedure of selecting the arbitrator. Can I switch on to question number 13? If a party is awarded in the resolution of adjudication on arbitration, can the respondent claim the cost of arbitral tribunal from the claimant at the awarding? If a party is awarded in the resolution. Now, basically in arbitration, in arbitration, not in adjudication, adjudication parties have to bear the cost equally, 50% by contract and 50% by the employer. Now, in arbitration, as I explained earlier, the arbitrator will decide the fees that has to be borne by either party at the final stages. If the arbitrator wishes, he can say the entire cost of arbitration shall be paid by the contractor to the employer if the contractor loses the case. Or he can say the entire cost of arbitration shall be paid by the employer to the contractor. That is the decision of the arbitrator. or he may not even award cost to either party. So it depends really. It is not there is no hard and fast rule. Arbitrator is the decision maker. He is the final decision maker with respect to cost of arbitration. SPD1 describes about early warning. Does it cover these items prescribed as compensation event in clause 44.1 of the same SPD1 compensation event? It means about payment also. If so, why should the engineer expect a warning from the contractor when such event occurs? Can you, question number 13 is not very clear. I will read it again. Can you explain it, the person who has written the question? SPD 1 clause 32 describes about early warning. Does it cover those items prescribed as compensation event? I am not sure. Now, clause 33.1, sorry, 32 discuss about the early warning. I will discuss about 32. The contractor shall warn the engineer at the earliest opportunity of specific likely future events or circumstances that may adversely affect the quality of work, increase the contract price, or delay the execution of the works. The engineer may require the contractor to provide an estimate of the expected effect of future event or circumstances on the contract price and completion date. The estimate shall be provided by the contractor. Now, this early warning clause that has been incorporated into the conditions of contract is that it is very important that the employer must know his commitments. Because if I am investing on a project of 30 million, and if it's going to end up as 50 million, I should be able to know how I am going to find the balance 20 million. I should be able to know how I am going to finance the project. And also, when can this project be completed? Because sometimes actually, let's say you are putting up a school building and you hope to open the school by January 10th. So if the contract is going to be delayed to March 31st or whatever it is, how are you going to start the school or additional classrooms? So at least you should be able to know that whether you should hire these classrooms from an outside party until the classrooms are completed. So this early warning is very important, whether it is in the SPD 1 or SPD 2, because it should give ample opportunity for the other party to get himself prepared for this one. So that is the very reason that there is an early warning clause in the conditions of contract. In order to cover this one, in SPD 2 and also in FIDIC also, they say 28 days notice has to be given. If you are making a claim from the employer, at least you must give 28 days notice. Otherwise, it's very difficult for an employer to finance the project in order to pay the additional cost. So basically, early warning is essential in contracts in order for the parties to be aware their commitments. Can I go to the next question? I think we have about 15 minutes to go, where I don't think I'll be able to finish everything, but let me see. Question number 15. If additional works are included in the contract within the contract value, final bill not exceeded contract value and additional work will be paid to ESR, is it necessary to pay the additional preliminaries? This is also a very important question. What he's asking is actually, supposing if there are additional work included in the contract, but it does not increase the contract value, whether is there any reason for to pay any additional preliminaries in such a situation? Now there is a bill, there is a booklet published by ICTAR for guidance for preparation of preliminaries. I hope everybody has seen this book. This is ICTAR Bill number 1, preliminaries. ICTAD publication number ICTAD ID, ICTAD stroke ID stroke note 4, second edition. I don't know whether I have the current edition, but I have edition here. Now, if you prepare the preliminaries in this manner, it will be very easy for you to decide whether it's exceeding or increasing. Now, in this booklet called preliminaries, there's something called mode of payment. So mode of payment, they have categorized into several categories. I think A, B, C, D, E, F, G, etc. So therefore, preliminaries, if you categorize your payments into these categories, it's very easy for you to decide whether you have, as an employer, whether you have to pay additional preliminaries to the contractor, or as a contractor, whether you are entitled for additional preliminaries. Now, for example, under category A, it says reimbursement of actual cost on submission of the relevant document acceptable to the engineer plus 5% of the cost. Now, for example, with respect to insurance policies, the contractor is entitled, according to this preliminaries published by ICTAD, the actual cost that they have paid, and any additional cost as 5% of the actual cost is cost of overheads and profits. So therefore, due to additional work given by the employer, if the duration had to be increased by another 1 month, then, and also the contractor had to extend his insurance cover by another 1 month, then although the contract price may not have changed, but he is entitled to claim his additional insurance cover because he has to spend additional money. So therefore, what I am advising is actually, I can't give a ruling and say, yes, you have to pay additional preliminaries. It depends on how you have computed the preliminaries. So what I am suggesting is actually, when you are computing preliminaries in a contract, you better follow this book, which is published by ICTAD, so that you know exactly whether you are entitled to the preliminaries as a contractor, or whether you have to pay preliminaries to the contractor because it gives a nice breakdown of everything. Now, for example, if there is a cost, now it says item number C, category C, 60% on completion of the temporary building or structure, 30% on equal installments over the contract period, the balance 10% on dismantling. Now, let's say the contractor has to put up a temporary building for the engineer staff. Now, it says you better pay 60% of the contract preliminary price after completion of the construction. The balance 30% has to be paid on equal installments during the contract period. So let's say if your contract is 3 months, and if your 10% is say 100,000 rupees, so you have to pay 100,000 rupees for all 3 months. So if your contract takes 4 months, that means you have to pay additional 10,000 because that is a maintenance cost that has to be paid to the contractor. So therefore, I can't give an hard and fast rule and say, yes, the contract is entitled for additional payment or not. It depends on how you have formulated your preliminaries. Are you all right on that question? And that is question number 15. Question number 16. If EOT is given due to contractor's fault, do client need to pay extra claims to the contractor if EOT is given due to contractors? Now, generally, the contractor, supposing extension of time is given due to neutral event, that is due to various adverse weather conditions, etc., the contractor is not entitled for additional cost because it's a neutral event. Similarly, if the extension has been given due to fault of the contractor, because for whatever it is, you have to justify that one, because at a later stage, the contractor might make a claim from the employer and say, I have received extension of time, therefore I'm entitled for additional payment. So therefore, you might have to confirm that when you are giving extension of time to the contractor, you must get a response from the contractor saying that there is no claim with respect to the additional time given to the contractor due to the fault of the contractor. Unless you get a justification from the contractor, there is a tricky situation for the DAB to make a decision on this matter. Other than COC, can the client add any special clauses in the agreement which will be signed by both parties? Question number 13, certainly you can. You can have special conditions, and sometimes they say it's a particular conditions, etc. You can have additional conditions. There is no restriction because this is contract is an agreement between two parties. So therefore, you can have additional conditions. If EOT is given to the contractor with the condition of no additional claims, is there any possibility to claim additional amount by the contractor in terms of preliminary or anything else? So this is the same question which I am answered under question number 16. So therefore, when you are giving extension of time, you might have, if you are giving outside the contract, because contract says how the extension of time should be given to the contractor and on what occasions and what are the entitlement of the contractor. If you are giving additional extension of time outside the contract, I think what I am suggesting is you must have a separate MOU, because the contractor also must agree that there is no claim with respect to the extension of time granted by the contractor. So therefore, there should be agreement between the parties in order before giving the extension of time, supposing if you are giving because of the fault of the contractor. When any bid documents advertised given with the condition no price escalation will be applicable, can any contractor claim price escalation? If there is any rules says price escalation must be included if contract period is exceed 3 months. I think I have read that one in this document, which is identified as Procurement Guidelines published by 2006. This is a government guideline for government contracts. Therefore, according to this government contracts, if your project exceeds 3 months, the contract is entitled for price escalation. So there is a claim on the part of the contractor for price escalation. I think I have read this clause. I don't want to read it again. So therefore, this is a government contract, but I don't know whether for private contract it may not be applicable. Clause 5.4.2, page 36, price adjustment, procurement guidelines. If you are working for the government sector, you must have a copy of this one. Procurement Guidelines 2006, Procurement Manual 2006. So these two documents are very important. If LD is repaid to the contractor for a particular period as an amicable solution after the negotiations, where the contractor fails to complete the work within the contract period, is the contractor eligible to claim additional for the period which LD was deducted? Now, only thing is actually when you enter into a contract, especially these contracts are government funded, though it is not your money, you are working for an organization. So don't change the contract agreement, because as an engineer, you have no authority to change the contract agreement between the parties. So I have never seen in a contract provision where you deduct the LD and you then pay the LD back. There is no provision. All these problems come when you deduct the LD and halfway through you start paying the LD to the contractor. So I can't give a decision on this matter because you have worked outside the terms of the contract. So therefore, it depends on the other facts also. Why did you pay the deducted amount? Whether you are entitled for deducting LD. So all these things have to be discussed before giving an answer to this one. So there are a few other questions. Can I stop there? I'm a little bit tired also because we have had a long session. Unfortunately, we have about another 3-4 questions to be answered. unless you have very specific question, because the other questions are about bank charges of interest payment that is given in the dictated conditions of contract, how interest shall be paid. So can I stop my discussion at this point, gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen? Can I stop my discussion at this stage? We have already reached 2 hours.
No, sir, if you can continue, but the time we scheduled up to 4 hours.
Unless you have any specific thing, I would prefer to stop it.
Okay, sir.
Are you all right? I can't hear you. Hello.
Then okay, sir. So we take this opportunity. I am Kajivan, Assistant Secretary, Wadakin Chapter.
Yes.
On behalf of ISL Wadakin Chapter, our sincere thanks to Dr. Ananda Ranasinghe for this valuable 2 hours time, because around 100 members participated in this session. It's very useful for the all engineers. So again, thank you very much, Dr. Ananda Ranasinghe, and also all the members who participate and make this event a success. We will meet another time if time permits.
So thank you very much for, sorry. Thank you very much for inviting this for me lecture. I hope it will be beneficial for you. So we will wind up then, no? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you very much for organizing the event.
Thank you.